And this part is the most important part because this is like really where you start to see how she's thinking in his absence. So this is a part from the book that Greenfield includes in her article. It says, and though she seemed to direct her eyes to such objects as they, her aunt and uncle, pointed out, she distinguished no part of the scene. Her thoughts were all fixed on that one spot of Pemberley House, whichever it might be, where Mr. Darcy then was. She longed to know what at that moment was passing in his mind. At length, however, the remarks of her companions on her absence of mind roused her. So she's so focused on what Mr. Darcy is doing and what he's thinking, but he's not there anymore. He already left. And so in his absence, she is thinking about him. And it says the less she physically distinguishes of Darcy, the more pensive she becomes. So she's focusing on the absence of him standing in the spot where he was. And so then the last point I have on here isn't really part of the encounter at Pemberley, but it's still really, really important to this point of absence provoking thought, and so I put it on here. It's the fact that Elizabeth doesn't know that she loves Darcy for sure until she is sure that they will no longer see each other. So after she knows that they're going to be he's going to be absent from her life, she is then positive that she loves him. So that's kind of like in his absence, she realizes that she loves him, and so that's a really big point for that one, even if it doesn't go with the encounter at Pemberley. Okay, and so then my next point is the universal truth about single men. And in this point, Greenfield is just trying to point out the other side of absence. So like these single men that they talk about in the beginning of Pride and Prejudice are not really people that exist. I mean, obviously they probably do, but it's not people that they are sure exist. And so the book starts with, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. And so what Greenfield is saying is that these men are absent, but everyone is thinking about them and thinking of ideas about them. So everyone thinks they know what they're talking about when it comes to these men, even though these men aren't really people that they know. The next point that goes with the same, or this is another subpoint of absence provokes thought. Elizabeth is almost always alone when she's thinking over evidence concerning Darcy, and when she's thinking about how she feels about him. So the first example of that is with Darcy's letter that he sends her. She's alone when she reads that, and then she's alone when she's thinking about him after her encounter and before her encounter with him at Pemberley. And then the third one is her aunt's second-hand account of his help with Lydia, when she's alone when she's thinking of that after her aunt leaves, and she's like recalling it and thinking about him and changing her opinions of him. And then what Greenfield said is this isolation helps Elizabeth resist the ignorance of common received opinions. So the common received opinions thing goes back to Locke, where he was saying that general knowledge or knowledge that you get from other people is it leads to ignorance. And so when Elizabeth is isolated and she's in the absence of other people, she has room to think for herself and reflect on her own experiences. Okay, and then this is my last point for the absence leading to thought, or provoking thought, and it's the end of Pride and Prejudice. And at the end, it's kind of interesting because it's the opposite of what Greenfield is saying, and it like helps to prove her point more, and she uses it at the end of her article, and she's just saying that the opposite of absence leading to thought in the end of Pride and Prejudice helps to prove her point too, because at the end of the book, Elizabeth is with Darcy and she's encouraging him to forget everything that doesn't make him happy. And this seems kind of backwards to Elizabeth's character, because for the whole rest of the book, before that, she had been thinking about Darcy in his absence. But it's actually not backwards, because In the non-absence of Darcy, Elizabeth doesn't think. So when Darcy is with her in her presence, she doesn't want to think anymore because she's already thought about him in his absence. Elizabeth enlarged her mind in Darcy's absence. Now that she is again in his presence, she willfully absents her own thoughts. And that's a quote from Greenfield in her article. That goes with this point that I've been talking about. Okay, and so my third point for the entire article is women and absent-mindedness. And Greenfield just talks about this a lot throughout her article, about how women are more likely to be absent-minded. The definition of absent-minded as in they think more in absence. And that's just because they don't, in this book at least, they aren't able to own the objects that surround them. So women are more likely to misunderstand the material objects that surround them, and they're more likely to be absent-minded because they cannot own the objects around them. The things around Elizabeth are literally less available and therefore more absent to her than they are for Darcy, because Darcy is allowed to own the things around him, and he's also allowed to own women because that's how the book works. And then the next point is that women depend on men but never possess them, so the men are always absent, so they're likely to fill the female mind. And this is just concerning why so many of the female characters in the book Pride and Prejudice are always thinking about men. It's because they are never allowed to possess the men like the men possess the women, and so obviously they are absent. And in Greenfield's point, since absence provokes thought, since they are always absent, they are always filling the female mind. The other part is that Elizabeth and Darcy both initially misperceive and dislike each other, but Darcy quickly knows better. This is kind of interesting because at first they both think that neither of them likes the other, and Elizabeth overhears Darcy saying that she is not handsome enough to tempt me, but soon after that he discovers her uncommonly intelligent eyes and her light and pleasing figure and her easy playfulness, and he realizes that they are indeed tempting. So Darcy immediately realizes that he's misperceiving her, while Elizabeth does not, and so it takes her quite a while to realize that she's misperceiving Darcy, and she actually doesn't really know what he's thinking because he changed his mind immediately after he said that to Bingley. Then the next part, misled by language, basically it's saying that Elizabeth didn't really have a chance to understand Darcy in any other way because the language around her is completely misleading. She lives in a world where news, gossip, secrets, disagreements, misunderstandings, and lies saturate her social world. So what she's continually hearing bad things about Darcy, and so the language, she's taking the language around her too literally, is basically what Greenfield is saying. And by taking, it says, Elizabeth's gravest mistakes occur when she takes language too literally, when she assumes words are really true. So this is just saying that Elizabeth is doomed to misunderstand the things around her because of the people around her. And she's doomed to misunderstand in the first place because she cannot own anything of the things around her, and that lack of ownership causes her to be uncertain, and that causes her to misperceive things.